Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Everyone's here. Tonight's class, as always, is in the memory of Yitzchak Tzvi ben Yosef. And today we're going to start getting into the spirit of Shavuos. Shavuos. Holiday is coming up. Holiday of cheesecake, that's true. Although that's not what it's really about. Although what? Yes. 10 Commandments are coming up. The story of the giving of the Torah. But in addition to the story of the 10 Commandments and Mount Sinai, there's another story that is very intimately connected to the holiday of Shavuos. And that is the story of Ruth. Why do we read the Megillah of Ruth, the book of Ruth, on Shavuos? In all communities, so many do it Shavuos Day. Our customers, we read it at night when we stay up all night studying Torah. What's the reason why we study the book of Ruth? Because,
she's the David, King David.
So the main reason given is she is the great-grandmother of King David. David HaMelech, his yahrzeit, the day of his passing, is on Shavuos. His great-grandmother, Ruth, who we'll discuss at the end because gave birth. Got my book in the Ruth gave birth to Oved, who gave birth to Yishai, who gave birth to King David. So King David, his yahrzeit is on Shavuos, so we study the lineage of him from Ruth. In addition, Shavuos is a holiday when all the Jews converted. The day when all the Jews came and we went to the mikvah, we said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we became the nation of God under the wings, became accepted under the wings of Hashem's Shekhinah, the divine presence. That was on Shavuos. So we're getting into that spirit by reading the story of Ruth. There's other explanations as well. But for now, we'll leave that. Again, it's not a class on the Megillah of Ruth. Today is going to be a class on the unique character, the unique personality of Ruth, and more importantly for us, how we are meant to internalize this character of Ruth, how her strength and we're going to soon, by the end of the class tonight, God willing, B'ezrat Hashem, we'll discover what made her so unique and so special and earned her such a special place in the history of the Jewish people, and how we have to internalize that in our lives as well. Yes? Sounds like a plan? Okay. So first, the background, right? We all need to know the context and the story, and of course, I'll share with you some of the crazy marriages that took place in the stories of Tanakh. So let's get some biblical characters into order. First of all, what year are we talking about? This story happened, you know, around approximately. I had a book of Ruth I was studying in the office. I forgot to bring it here, but it's okay. But the book of Ruth opens with the words that it was in the times of Shoftim, in the time when the judges were judging. Or, as explained in the Talmud, when the judges were being judged. When the rabbis and the judges of the Jewish community were not so great, and the community was not so impressed, shall we say, there was a lot of judgment of the judges. Can you imagine that, right? The community judges the rabbi, and etc. So, it was a time of a lot of chaos for the Jewish people. Let's just put it like that. Time of a lot of chaos. Or as when the judges were time of a lot of chaos. What the comments? A lot of chaos for the Jewish people. And it was a tough time for the Jewish people, spiritually and morally. But the time of the Shoftim, of the judges, like 350 years. Doesn't give a specific time. In the Talmud, Baba Basra, it says that Boaz is Itzvan. Meaning, if that's the case, if according to that opinion that Itzvan, who was one of the judges, was Boaz, so he lived near the times of Samuel the prophet, which would be in the year 968 BCE, about 304 years after the Jewish people came to the land of Israel. If that gives you a clarity of what time we're talking about. If it does, it does. If it doesn't, it's long ago. For some people, 300 years after the Jews entered Israel is the same thing like saying, 16 billion years ago, But if it helps you to put it into context, that's the context. It helps me at least. So I had to share it with you. Okay. But here's the interesting thing. So we know that there's two people. Elimelech, who is married to Naomi. That's the story. Elimelech, who is a leader and a prince amongst the Jewish people. He's a very respected and very wealthy Jew who decides that he's leaving the land of Israel to go to the land of Moab. Why is he leaving? Okay, I don't want to get too into all the details, there's a lot of fascinating stuff. The explanation given is not very complimentary. He was stingy. And it was a time of famine. It was a time of a difficult economic time for the Jewish people, or for the land of Israel. And everyone was coming to him for help. He was a leader and very influential in the community. And he had to get to help everyone. They didn't want to. So he just packed up his bags and went with his two sons. He had two sons, right? Machlon and Kilion. He traveled with his sons to go to the land of Moab, which was obviously a big mistake. God was not very happy with that. As we'll soon discover, now, he dies. Both of his children die. They ended up marrying Moabite girls. Whether or not they convert is another conversation. If it was a real conversion, if it was a conversion for marriage that wasn't legitimate, which is why Ruth had to convert a second time. We'll leave that discussion for another time as well. But the point is, you want to hear it, huh? Elimelech and his wife Naomi and his two young boys, Machlon and Kilion, traveled from the land of Israel to the land of, okay, now some juicy stuff. Marshall's not here, but some juicy stuff. Okay, it's a little confusing, but let's see if we can saying Haldkop. Elimelech is one of four brothers. Four brothers. What are the four brothers' names? Elimelech, Salmon. Salmon, we're going to discover later, is the father of Boaz, the man that will marry Ruth. Remember that name. The third is called Tov, which means good, although his name is not mentioned. These names are not mentioned in Tanakh, at least not here. But it's a hint that later on, Boaz says, there's someone better than me to marry you, referring to Tov. When the story of the book of Ruth will actually talk about this other brother of Elimelech, it will not mention him by name. He will be called Ploni Almoni, which in Hebrew is an expression. What does Ploni Almoni mean? So-and-so. So-and-so. If you want to say John Doe, in Hebrew, Ploni Almoni. John Doe in Hebrew is Ploni Almoni. When in the story, the book of Ruth, it describes how Boaz wants to speak to his uncle, the brother of Elimelech. He meets him at the gate, and he sees Ploni Almoni, which means John Doe, or so-and-so. Says, come here, and they sit down in front of the elders, and so his name is not mentioned. The fourth is the father of Naomi. The father of Naomi. You heard that? We don't know his name. But the father of Naomi, which means that when Elimelech marries Naomi, who is he marrying? His niece. His niece. Which, if you wanted to get really Talmudic and really, really into it, would mean that when Elimelech died, Naomi was inheriting from her husband, besides for her ksuba, she was inheriting as the daughter of one of the uncles. Her sons were inheriting as the sons of one of the uncles, whatever. Anyway. What? No, she knows when Elimelech dies. Elimelech was a rich man, but then he died and they became penniless. Anyway, whatever. The point is, so Elimelech is married to his niece, and you didn't know this before, right? If you knew that, it was his niece. He marries his niece. No. They go with the two boys, and these two boys married two girls. Ruth and, you forgot her name, huh? You know her name? Anyone? Ruth and, see if anyone on the chat knows, what's her name? Ruth and Arpa. Arpa is spelled Ayin Resh Pei He. Actually, from the word Oref. Oref, you know what Oref means? The back of the neck. Like Paro, by the way, side note, Paro is the same letters as Arpa. And Paro also is the neck, etc. So Arpa, I'm going off subject now, but Arpa is called the back of the neck because when she left Ruth, what did she do? She turned the back of her neck. So she turned away from Naomi, she turned the back of her neck, so she's called Arpa. And Ruth is from the word Ra'ah. Ra'ah means to see. Very good, very good. To see. She saw her mother-in-law face to face. She looked at her face to face. She stayed with her. Okay. I'm doing all the juicy stuff and you missed it. So, there's more coming, don't worry. There's more coming. More coming. If you're watching, don't go away. Okay, so she marries these two boys, Machlon and Kilion, marry these two girls, Ruth and Arpa, who may be sisters. And according to one opinion, they are the granddaughters of the king Eglon. If you're familiar with Tanakh, there was a very, very, very large obese king. His name was Eglon. The whole story, how he was killed. He was a great-grandchild of Balak. Balak, if you remember in the Torah, is the Moabite king that hires Bilam to curse the Jewish people. Okay? So I know there's a lot of stuff going on. I'm just trying to blow you with how much I prefer. No, there's a lot of. It's a fascinating story. The more you try and dig into the history of Ruth, the more you discover all of these like really cool components to her background that are not well known. So she's a great grandchild of Balak, the king of Moab, a granddaughter of Eglon, who was another king that was killed. He was stabbed by a dagger, I think by I forgot the name of the person that stabbed him to death on the top of my head. But he was a large king, whatever, and he was stabbed like this. It says he was so fat that the sword got stuck inside the layers of his fat. The sword like disappeared inside him. Yeah, that's how big he was. You're a king, you get whatever. And what happens to these two boys, Machlon and Kilion? They both die in the land of Moab, childless. So these two girls who come from royal family, it's not clear if they actually grew up as princesses in the palace or not. The grandfather was a king for sure. But whether their father was also a king, it's not known. It doesn't say clearly, but they definitely came from very royal stock. They obviously grew up in the wealth and in, riches and in a very, very gifted, privileged lifestyle, are now penniless, returning back with Naomi, their mother-in-law, back to the land of Israel. Naomi realizes she has nothing to do with Moab. She has nothing there. She has no land. She has no people. She has no wealth. So she's going back. And as she's going back, what happens? Ruth and Orpah, her two daughter-in-laws, are traveling together with her. Now they're penniless. They're so poor that they're wearing old torn clothing. They don't have a penny to their name. They have nothing. In fact, as they were traveling on the road, one of the commentators says literally on the road, meaning no shoes. They were walking barefoot. Imagine a homeless beggar walking barefoot. That's what they look like. So what happens? Let's look at our text now, if you will. Book of Ruth, chapter 1, verse 8. And Naomi says to her two daughter-in-laws, right? So they're walking. And Naomi says to her two daughter-in-laws, Naomi says to her two daughter-in-laws, go return each woman to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the deceased and with me. So the deceased is referring to her two sons, who her two daughter-in-laws buried, prepared shrouds for them, buried them, etc. You have dealt kindly with them. You have dealt kindly with me by honoring me, by staying with me. But you've done your duty as a daughter-in-law. Your husbands are dead. Go back to your connected, privileged, wealthy family, and you'll have a good life for you. So what do the women say? No, they're crying, whatever. They don't want to go. They both say to her, we want to stay with you. So now we know by Jewish law. Let's keep on reading. So I'm skipping to verse 11 just to make it quicker. So Naomi says, return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they should be your husbands? Meaning, if I would have more sons coming and you said you wanted to stay because you would marry new kids, my new children. Okay, but I'm not having any more kids. I'm already an older woman. I'm not married. I'm not having more sons that one day you will marry them. So that, I have no future for you. I have nothing to offer you. You should stay with me. Why should you go with me? Then she says again the next verse, verse 12. Return, my daughters, go. For I have become too old to marry, that I should say that I have hope. Even if I had a husband tonight, and even if I had born sons, verse 13, would you wait for them until they grew up? Would you shut yourselves off for them and not marry? No, my daughters, for as much more bitter for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. Okay? So here you see how she tells them, not once, not twice, but 3 times she says to them, return, right? Verse number 8, she says to them, go return each woman to her mother's house. Verse 11, she says, return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Verse 12, return, my daughters, go, for I have become too old to marry. Why do we find 3 times that she tells her daughter-in-laws to return back to their home? Excellent, very, very good. When the convert wants to convert, by Jewish law, we push them away 3 times. Push them away 3 times. In general, we make it difficult, but here you see the precedent that 3 times the convert is pushed away and told, return back to your family. You don't need to go with me. Your life will be better off not coming with me, but staying where you grew up and staying with your family, your homeland, where you came from. And of course, what Naomi is saying to her daughter-in-laws makes perfect sense. She's not just saying it like, I have a religious obligation, return to your home. She's saying to him, I have nothing. You still have a future. You're still young. You're still beautiful. You still have a family and relatives here. Go find yourself a new husband. Go build yourself a new life. Make yourself a new home, a new family. And life will be good for you. There's nothing for me. And where is she going? She's going to Israel. They're not going, they're not going to a place that they know where they'll be accepted. These are girls that at best converted for marriage that weren't necessarily going to be accepted. We'll see later on in the story that Ruth had a struggle about that. So basically she says to them, you should go home. You should go back to your families. What happens? Verse 14, and they raised their voices and wept again. Because they wept the first time when she said to go home. Now they raise their voices. They cry again. Listen to the next words. We're going to come back to this later. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. But Ruth cleaved to her. Cleaved? To kiss is to kiss. To cleave is to become united, to become together like one. Davik in Hebrew, Vatishak Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. And Ruth Davka ba. The word Davik, translate, Nafar, translate Davik? Glue. It's actually cemented together, glued together. So when you're glued together, you're like literally united as one. The kisses, you give a kid, and then you move on. So Ruth kissed her mother-in-law. But Ruth was Davkaba. She was united, cleaved, glued together. They became like inseparable. And then Ruth says to her, there's another verse, she says, she's crying. She says, please don't make me go away. And then her mother-in-law says to her, go away, go home, you don't need me. And Ruth says to her, verse 16, the most famous, one of those all-time beautiful verses of the entire Tanakh. And Ruth says, do not entreat me to leave you, to return from following you. For wherever you go, I will go. And wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. So may the Lord do to me, and so may he continue, if anything but death separate me and you. Right? Beautiful words. We are together. Where you go, I go. Where you lodge, I lodge. Your people shall be my people. Your God shall be my God. 4 different expressions of connection. And then she says even more, wherever you die, I die. I will be buried with you. Nothing but death will separate us from each other. Okay. That's the text. That's the story inside.
And the sister went back.
Orpah goes back to her sister-in-law. Oh, it's also her sister. According to one's opinion, it's also her sister. Sister-in-laws and sisters are the same thing. And, saying in stories of Tanakh, it's like, yeah, you have a lot of stories like that. So, Orpah goes back, and Ruth goes with her mother-in-law to land of Israel. I'll take 2 minutes to tell you what happens to Orpah, okay? Just because it's really good. I'm going to go back to Orpah later on, but this is the part of the juicy part. Where does Orpah go? You think she went back to Moab, and that's the end of the story. We don't hear from her again. First, this is the Talmud. Are you paying attention? It says she went to a house of prostitutes. She went like the opposite extreme. She went from being this moral, righteous woman following Naomi, and she became Harpa, where Harpa means that she was like a field that was winnowed, where they threshed all the seeds, and that she was intimate with 100 men. 100 men, meaning there's promiscuity, and then there's an extreme, like a fanaticism when you go like off the deep end, where like you want to like prove how far you can go from the values and the loyalty of Judaism to the opposite extreme, that she made herself into where she was open on all sides, so the people coming her from all sides. So the Talmud says. Then she had a child. She actually had 4 children. One is she came that night, also whatever, but she had a child. She had 4 sons. Each of her sons were giants. Why did she merit to have giants? Because she cried 4 tears. Text says that she cried 4 times, says that she cried. If you look at, I skipped some of the verses where she cried, but 4 times in the story it says that Orpah cried. Because she cried 4 times, but she separated from her mother-in-law, she merited to have 4 sons. Each were giants. And the Talmud said all four of the names. Three, you don't know who they are. But one you do know. Who's the most famous giant that you've ever heard of? Goliath. Goliath is the son of Arpa, who is killed by King David, who is the great-grandson of Arpa's sister-in-law and the sister, Ruth. You understand? Yeah.
Next time, please put it in writing.
Keep the family tree. Keep the family tree. So Goliath comes from the king of Balak and from the king Eglon. He's a giant born to Arpa. After Arpa separates from Naomi and goes back to be with a lot of people, from there she becomes pregnant. There's different discussions who is the father of this Goliath. We don't know if she gets married, but definitely that's the story. That's who the mother is. Okay, so David and they're like they know each other. They have a history. In addition, so it says further on that Arpa walked with her mother-in-law 40 steps. It says she walked with her. Not here in the comments. She walked. They walked together, and because she walked 40 steps to kiss with her mother-in-law, to escort her mother-in-law Arpa, as a result of that, Goliath was able to taunt the Jews for 40 days. It says that Goliath came every day, every morning, every night, to curse the Jews, right? If you know the story of King David and Goliath, he would come every day to curse the Jewish people. Where did he merit to curse the Jews for 40 days? Because his mother walked 40 steps to accompany Naomi, therefore Goliath was given, so to say, the protection for 40 days to curse the Jews until King David came to kill him. Okay. We will talk about King David next week. Although my plan was to do Ruth this week, and next week, before Shavuot, to do King David. Although I'm strongly considering to do maybe the lineage of King David and of Mashiach, the story of the Ibum and the story of, there's a lot of reincarnation inside the story of Ruth. I'm not going to get into tonight because there's other ways we're going somewhere else, but the reincarnation of the daughter of Lot, there's a lot of stuff that we can how Mashiach comes from all this Yibum. It's another fascinating Kabbalistic idea. So we'll see what we do next week. Well, here's the story. Let's go back to the story, right? Let's at least finish the story. And then I'm going to show you how in these verses you see the greatness of Ruth over Arpa, what makes her so unbelievably unique, and what life lessons we can try to internalize and emulate from the life of Ruth. Got it? But let's first finish the story because we got to know the end of the story. You don't know the story, end the story in the middle. That's not nice. So what happens? Ruth and Naomi continue their journey to the land of Israel. They come to the land of Israel. Who knows the rest of the story, by the way? Raise your hands. Who knows? You know the story? What? Yeah. After this part is famous. Everyone knows. She said, wherever you go, I'll go. But then what happens in the land of Israel? Okay. So, what? She meets somebody in the field. Yes. Boaz. So let me tell you the story. I'll tell you the whole story. I'll give you the full background over here. The whole story. Okay. She comes to the land of Israel, and as I already mentioned, they are penniless. They don't have a nickel. They don't have any food. So what do? They join the other beggars of Israel going around to the fields trying to get food. Now, in biblical times, there were three beautiful mitzvot that were given by God to the Jewish people that were farmers in their fields. They were leket, shikha, and peah. Let me explain. There was a law that when the farmer was gathering in all the harvest of his field, and he came to gather the harvest, anything that was not gathered into the bundle, if it was one or two stalks that fell, that wasn't gathered, you have to leave it behind for the poor to come after the work is finished, for the poor to take. That's called, in English, the gleanings. To me, the word leket makes more sense than the word gleanings, but gleanings, if they don't, gleanings. Like phylacteries, whatever. So the gleanings. So leket is gleanings. It's the single one or two stalks of the wheat or whatever, or the barley that falls. Shikha is if the workers, the owner, dropped and left behind by mistake, he forgot one bundle of wheat, he has to leave it for the poor. More than that, he can go back and get it. If he left behind only one, he leaves it for the poor. And peah is the corner of the field that is not harvested, is also left for the poor. So she came, still today. So they came, according to one commentary, on the second day of Pesach. The day that they arrived in Israel was on Passover, which was just at the time of the harvest of the barley, of the omer. And the fact that if you're familiar with the omer offering in the temple, all the Jews would go to the field to cut the omer together. That's when they came. So the time of the harvest, and they go out to the field, and all the people are going out to the fields to gather the stuff. And she somehow ends up in the field of Boaz. I mean, not somehow. God makes it, she ends up there. She goes to that field, and the workers are looking at how Ruth collects the wheat. Ruth was strikingly, unbelievably, drop-dead gorgeous. It says she was very beautiful, with very beautiful features. And Boaz notices Ruth amongst the beggars collecting. But he notices her modesty. She wouldn't bend down to pick up the stalks. She was on the floor. She would crouch, to pick it up in a modest way. The ears of grain that were tall, she wouldn't crouch. She would stand. He noticed how when there was more than 2 pieces on the floor, she wouldn't take them, etc., etc. He notices the righteousness of the way she's collecting, etc. He asks his workers about her. They tell her who she is. So he says, leave her, let her stay tonight when we eat. I guess they slept in the fields back then. That's what we sleep in the sukkah. You're working, you have to go all the way back to the city, back and forth. It's, they would work all day. They would eat at night, and they'll go to sleep in the field in the morning to continue working. She says, that night she should stay with us, and we'll feed her. And Boaz gives her food. It says he gave her full grain to eat to be satisfied. He even gave her husks of grain like a delicacy. Roasted grain, it's a kali. It's like a roasted grain, like some kind of delicacy he gave her to eat. And she ate. She comes back home to her mother-in-law to share with her mother-in-law what she got. By the way, you see the tremendous dignity of Ruth, but she didn't want her mother. You have to also remember, her mother-in-law had been from the royal nobility of Israel. Remember, Naomi was a very wealthy lady when she left Israel. Married to Elimelech, who was one of the leaders of the people, very wealthy. And now she comes back, an orphan, a widow, penniless, in tattered clothing, no shoes, begging for. It's very, very difficult. What? I'm going to say it's very embarrassing for her to go out to bed to beg. So Ruth says to her mother, "You don't go to collect. You stay here, and I'll go out to the field, and I'll bring you back, and I'll share with you." See the dignity of Ruth to protect her mother-in-law's dignity. So, and she could have argued the other way. She could say, I don't know anybody here. You know the fields. You know where things are. And Ruth actually went back and forth to see where she was going because she didn't want to get lost, etc. She's very methodical. Anyway, so she goes to, she goes back to her mother-in-law. And the mother-in-law asks her, where did you get this from? Because she wasn't only coming back with the raw grain that she found in the field. She was coming back with cooked food. She came back with meat, bread to eat. And she was coming back with delicacies. She was coming back with these kernels, these like parched, these roasted kernels of grain. Like good food. That you don't find, the beggars don't find that in the field. And she knew that her daughter-in-law wasn't going to go asking people like, where did you get this from? So she tells her, I went to this in the field, and this guy told me to eat with the workers, and he gave me food, etc. She asks who's the guy, and she finds out that it's Boaz. Now, as Vivi said, I thought I was going to get there anyway, Boaz, I already mentioned before, is related. How is Boaz related? Because Boaz is the son of the second brother of Elimelech, Salmon. Right? There's Elimelech, Salmon, Ploni Almoni, John Doe, who the commentators say his name is Tov, and the other unknown name of the father of Naomi. So Boaz is both the cousin of Naomi and also, he's the cousin of Naomi and the son of the uncle. Yeah, he's the uncle and he's the cousin. Correct. Well, the uncle and the cousin of Naomi. That's correct. Still paying attention. Good for you. Yeah, you did good. So the uncle and the cousin of Naomi. So they're related, very much so related. They're related. They're doubly related, right? So she says, so Ruth has an idea. Right, Naomi has an idea. Naomi wants that Ruth should marry Boaz. Now we know that there's a concept in Jewish law called yibum. What is yibum? Yibum is that if in English is levirate marriage. You know what levirate marriage is? Yeah, it's usually so levirate marriage or yibum in Hebrew is if a person is married and he dies without having any children, the brother of the person that passed away marries the widow in order to have new children based on the soul of his brother. And again, there's a lot of Kabbalistic depth to this mitzvah. Maybe next week's class will be on that topic. Maybe. I didn't decide yet. Maybe. But I wasn't planning. I was planning on King David next week. So we can give me feedback. If you want King David, we should go into this whole story. The following week, it's Shavuot. But anyway, so what's the story? So Yibum means that you have to marry the widow to have children in the name of the person that passed away. Elimelech died. The two children died. Machal and Cleaves had no kids. So Ruth, who is the husband, the widow of these boys, she should marry Boaz, who will have children in the name of her family. Plus, also Boaz is very wealthy. Then Ruth will be taken care of. She won't be a beggar, begging and collecting grain in the fields of the other beggars. She'll be taken care of. So she tells Ruth very briefly, go to the field, go to sleep by his legs, uncover his legs. There's a whole meaning here too. She goes back to the field where he's sleeping, where Boaz is sleeping. She dresses herself in her finest clothing. She gets all dressed for her first date. When Boaz is sleeping, she comes. What? That's a good question. I don't know. It says she got dressed in nice clothing. I need a book in front of me to look exactly what the verse says. It's a good question, which I'm not going to have to look. Good question. She gets dressed, and she goes to lie in the field next to Boaz. Boaz, what happens? Boaz is sleeping, and all of a sudden he wakes up, and there's a woman sleeping by his legs. A woman sleeping by his legs. More dramatic. He asks her, "Who are you? Are you married or not married?" She says, "I'm not married." He says, "Are you clean or impure? Like, are you in your nida period?" She says, "I'm not. I'm pure." You can imagine when a man, you wake up in the middle of the night with a woman sleeping by your legs. It's like. Says he touched her hair to make sure she was real and not a dream, not a ghost. He said ghosts don't have hair, so he wanted to feel her hair to make sure she's a real human being, not something who knows what, in this dream hallucinating. Anyway, she's real. She has hair. She's a real person, and she is uncovered his legs, and she's lying by his legs. And he says, "Who are you?" And she says, "I am." She's very calm and dignified in a very moral way, without being immodest or immoral. She says, "I am Ruth, your maidservant. I'm the widow of Machlon." Again, I don't have the book in front of me. But whatever. She says who she is. She says who she is. And Boaz realizes that he has the opportunity to consummate a marriage with her. After all, this is a woman that, by law, the mitzvah yibum can be his by law. So he's very tempted, right then and there, to make a wedding. Who needs a rabbi? Who needs a chuppah? Right? Make it happen. But he says to her, "There's someone who's tov yosem mimeni, someone that's better than me to do the mitzvah of yibum." Hence, I said that Mr. John Doe, his name is Tov. Let's wait till the morning, and we're going to go to my uncle, who is the brother of Elimelech, because the brother of Elimelech is really the first one who should do yibum with the widow of Elimelech's kids. Very righteous. Boaz is a very holy, righteous man. Absolutely. Boaz is a very righteous man. He was one of the leaders of the Jewish people. And here you see an unbelievable act of strength that this woman is lying by his feet. She's literally surrendering herself to him. She's, I'm a helpless beggar. You have to understand the situation. She's an immigrant, helpless, nothing to her name, no one to defend her. She has no man to defend her. If something happened to her, no one's going to stand up for her. No one. She has no one in the world, or no one in Israel for sure not, that would defend her. And she's coming to him in the middle of the night, sleeping by him, saying, "I'm your maid, please take me." So she's asking him to take her. And yet he holds himself back, and he says, "I cannot take you until I first go speak to Mr. John Doe, to this person who's better than me, and let me see if he will marry you and do the mitzvah of yibum. Good. If not, then I'll take you." He says, "Please don't fool me, don't trick me, and let's wait till the morning because you don't want me to abandon me. So I won't abandon you, etc." So they sleep there that night separate. They don't touch. That the whole night goes by, and he holds himself back. Unbelievable restraint. It's unbelievable restraint. The night goes till the morning. The sun comes up, and nothing has happened between them. He says, "Come with me. We're going to go to the gates of the city." They go to the gates of the city. The gates of a city in biblical times was not just a very public place where everyone came in and out, but it's also a place for the judges. Friday with Lot, whatever. The place of the judges is a place of like very public place. If you want something to be very public and like the center of town, where the gates of the city, because everyone had to go through the gates of the city to go to the fields, etc. So it's like the center of town. He goes over there and he asks 10 of the elders of the town to come sit with him to make a court. So the fact that he's taking 10 elders and the elders are listening to him shows you what kind of stature Boaz has. Some schnook, some just random guy comes to the gates and say, I want 10 of the elders of the town to come sit with me. But he could do that. So 10 of the prestigious leaders of the community, the Zkanim, the elders, meaning the sages, the rabbis, the scholars, they sit down and he asks them, what can I, and then who else comes by? His uncle, Mr. John Doe. Tanakh doesn't say his name, just said Mr. comes along, pointing the Almighty, this unknown guy, so-and-so. And he says, oh, perfect. Hashem orchestrated everything to be exactly right away. The next morning, he gets 10 rabbis, and who walks by the gates of the city? His uncle, so-and-so, Mr. So-and-so. So Mr. So-and-so comes by, he has no idea what's about to happen. He says, come here for a few minutes. He says, Naomi has a field. And so I started saying about the inheritance, but it's complicated. She has a field. I want you to buy the field. It's Naomi was his niece. Also, it was his sister-in-law, right? The widow of your deceased brother Elimelech. Buy her field to give her money so she can have food to sustain herself. So this guy says, absolutely, I'll buy the field. So he says, but there's one more condition. When you buy the field, you also have to marry her daughter-in-law, Ruth, in order to have children from to keep the name of your brother alive in the Jewish community. And that Mr. So says, I can't do that. I cannot destroy my future progeny. I will destroy my seed, my children. Why is he so worried to destroy his seed? Yes. And that's what I think maybe will be next week's class, to go more into this idea. But let me explain to you, why was he so worried to marry Ruth? After all, first of all, Ruth was very, very beautiful. Secondly, it's a mitzvah to marry her. He is the brother of Elimelech. She is the widow of Elimelech's son. There's no children living that carry the name of Elimelech. So he has a mitzvah of Yibum to take this girl. So why does he not take her to have children who will be able to continue the name of his brother? It's too selfish. Okay, that's one explanation. You can also look at the next text that you have in your sheet from Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 24, verse 4, and then verse 5. It says, an Ammonite or a Moabite should not enter the assembly of the Lord. Even the 10th generation shall never enter the assembly of the Lord. We know that, for example, if you have a mamzer, a bastard, who's born from an illicit union, they can't marry any Jewish person. But if two mamzerim, two children, both born out of wedlock, marry, their children could be born into the Jewish people. A Mitzri, who's from the tribe of the land of Egypt, says the third generation can marry. It means that even if two Egyptians marry, the Jews, they both convert. 100% kosher conversion. Mr. Egyptian man converts to Judaism. And the Egyptian woman converts to Judaism. They're both Jews. 100% Jews. But a Jew cannot marry a descendant of Egypt, because of what they did to the Jewish people in Egypt. The Torah says that a Jew cannot marry this Egyptian. If they have children, so this Egyptian man marries an Egyptian woman because they both can't marry a Jew. Even their children can't marry into a Jew until the next generation, until the third generation. But here in verse 4 of chapter 24 of the book of Deuteronomy, the Torah tells us that when we're talking about an Ammonite from the nation of Ammon, or someone from the nation of Moab, they both are where the Jordan is today. Ammon is further south and Moab is further north. From those two nations, they may never enter the assembly of the Lord. So an Ammonite or a Moabite can be 100% Jewish, do a proper conversion, be 100% Jewish, but they can never marry a Jew. They cannot enter the assembly of the Lord, not even the 10th generation, meaning basically never. Never. Why not? Says the next verse, because they did not greet you with bread and water on the way when you left Egypt. That's reason number one. If you remember, when the Jewish people were taken, not when they left Egypt then. Yeah, when the Jews left Egypt, going to the land of Israel. And Moshe wanted to go through the land, to come to the land of Israel directly, not to go all the way around. What do? They came to fight against the Jewish people, not to let them go through the land. And the Jews had to go all the way around. So because they wouldn't even give you, they were cousins. Where does Ammon and Moab come from, by the way?
What is what?
What's the lineage of Ammon and Moab? Lot. Who said Lot? You said Lot? Yeah, Lot had two daughters. Remember that story? You ready, Marsha? Lot had two daughters, right? After the city of Sodom was destroyed, and the older daughter made her father pregnant. They got him drunk, and she became pregnant from her father. And she said, "This child is Me'ah, from my father, Moab." The other one also got him pregnant, and she said, "Ammoni, from my nation, Ami, my nation, my father." So these two nations, who are the cousins of the Jewish people, wouldn't give us bread to eat. So therefore, they cannot enter into that's one reason why they can never become Jews. Second reason, says the verse, and because, right over here, and because the people of Moab hired Balaam, the son of Beor, from Pasor in Aram Naharaim against you to curse you. Remember, I reminded you that Balak, the king of Moab, hired Bilam to curse the Jews. And because they tried to curse the Jewish people, therefore what? They should never be allowed to marry into the Jewish people.
But Ruth wasn't a Moab.
Of course, she's a Moabite.
Yeah,
She's a Moabite. She's a Moabite. By the side, what's the connection of the first reason in verse 5 and the second connection in verse 5? Second reason in verse 5? Verse 5 is giving us two different reasons why a Moabite can never marry into the land of to the people of Israel. One, because they wouldn't give us food when we left Egypt, and one, because they hired Balaam to curse the Jewish people. What's the connection between these two reasons? Just very quickly. The people of Moab said, "Why did we not give food to the Jews?" It was a bad year economically. There was a recession that year, so we didn't have food to give the people of Israel. Yeah, but you had money to hire Bilam to curse the Jewish people. They paid Bilam a lot of money to curse the Jews. So to say that you couldn't afford to give food to your cousins who are escaping slavery, but you have money to hire Bilam to curse the Jews, you're full of you know what, and therefore you can never become a Jew and never marry to the community of Jews. Anyway, the point is, Ruth, as we already established, comes from where? Moab. She's a great-great-granddaughter of Balak, the king of Moab, the one that hired Bilam to curse the Jews, the one that led his army to stop the Jews from going through his land. That's where she comes from. And the Torah says a Moabite can never marry into the nation of Israel. So therefore, Mr. Ploni Almoni, this Mr. John Doe, his name is not mentioned because he wouldn't marry his brother's daughter-in-law. Says, I can't marry her because it will destroy my future children. Any child that I will give birth to with this woman will never be allowed to marry another Jew. So I'm not going to create children that will be born into the situation where they can never marry. I would never do that. I'm not doing this. You understand the problem? Okay. So Boaz turns to now the 10 assembled scholars and sages that were there, that were sitting by the gate. And he says to them, tell me, is a Jew, allowed to marry a girl from Moab? And they say to him, the teaching that's recorded in the Talmud, it's a very beautiful, very famous teaching, it's discussed at great length in the Talmud, and they say to him that it says Ammoni, if you look at this text, Lo Yavo Ammoni, and a Moavi, does not say a Moabite, a Moavis, or Ammonis, only Ammoni. Ammoni and Moavi is written in male grammar. Does not say in the feminine grammar, a Moabite, Moavis. And therefore, since it's only written in the male and not in the female, means Lo Yavo Ammoni, Veloy Ammonis. Only a male Ammonite cannot marry into the Jews, but a female could. Lo Yavo Moavi, Velo Moavis. Only a male member of the tribe of Moab cannot marry, but a woman is not included in the prohibition. A female woman of Moab would be allowed to marry a Jew. Why would the prohibition be only on the men, not on the women? What? So Rashi explains, I didn't put the Rashi in there, right? No, I didn't put the Rashi in there. But Rashi explains that who's the one that goes out to war not to let the Jewish people go by? What's in the Talmud? The men, not the women. So it's the men that stopped the Jews from going through. It's the men that hired Bilam, not the women who were involved in this, and therefore the women were never part of the sin against the Jewish people, and therefore the women were never included in the prohibition not to marry a Jew. Okay? So here we have clear why Mr. John Doe says, I'm not willing to marry Ruth. She's a Moabite, and the Moabite can't marry, yes.
Once he heard the judges say it's okay, then why didn't he?
Oh, so why didn't he? He didn't trust the ruling. He was still worried. What if the rabbis? Well, you're going to see, we're not going to talk about King David today. And the tremendous amount of shushking, you know what shushking means? The rumors and negative gossip that was spread about King David in the earlier part of his life. Because he was a descendant of this woman that many people, including Naomi, adamantly fought were not allowed to be accepted into the Jewish people. And they argue that David was born from an improper, illegal relationship that should never have been allowed. And that David was from improper stock. Improper lineage. You understand? We're going to get to next week's class. We're going to talk about this. Probably, I think it'll be next week's class. Not just the whole birth of David HaMelech. There's crazier stories. I'll blow your socks to tell you how David HaMelech was conceived and how he was born. It's a crazy story. They did not teach this in Hebrew school. I promise you. So it's a crazy story. It's a crazy story. If you come next week, that'll be next week's class. It's a crazy story. And basically, he says, Plony says, I'm not getting involved with this woman that who knows what's going to be if she'll be accepted. She's a Moabite. Moabites can't enter to the people of Israel. Boaz says, I have a tradition from the rabbis. This is a tradition, part of Torah Shebal Peh, part of the oral Torah, that a Moabite female could marry to the nation of the Jewish people. It's only the males from Moab that are not allowed to marry. Side note, why do we read the book of Ruth on Shavuot? Another explanation is that only Boaz showed his trust in rabbinic interpretation, unlike his brother-in-law, or his uncle. Unlike his uncle. Boaz's uncle didn't trust the rabbis. He only trusted the written word of the text of the Torah without trusting and having full faith to follow how the rabbis interpret the Torah. Therefore, on Shavuot, we want to remember how Boaz did the right thing. So obviously, we read the story, Boaz made the right choice. And this other man, whose name is not even mentioned, because the Torah doesn't want to mention his name in the context of refusing the mitzvah, of giving a name and a future to his deceased brother, to Elimelech. This person thought he was being righteous by only being literal in the text of the Bible and ignoring the teachings of the rabbis. So he made a big mistake. So on Shavuot, we celebrate not just the giving of the written Torah, but as Jews, we know that at Mount Sinai, God also gave the oral Torah together with the written Torah. That's another message.
So-and-so's brother's son married.
So instead, since this brother-in-law, this brother of Elimelech, Mr. John Doe, his name is Tov, doesn't marry Ruth, so what happens? The 10 rabbis that are there say you can marry a Moabite girl. So Boaz then, right then and there, with, that's another reason, one of the sources you need 10 people for Shabbat brachos to celebrate a wedding, is here where Boaz marries Ruth in front of these 10 elders of the city. He wasn't like a secret. He marries them. Boaz knew this halacha. This ruling that the verse only referring to males, not females, wasn't invented then. But he wanted that the rabbi should give him a ruling, not that he should give it himself. He's a judge, because he's biased, right? You can't give a ruling for yourself. You have to go to someone else, and so someone else give you the ruling, even if you're familiar with the ruling. So basically, Boaz waited to be told by the other 10 rabbis of the city, the elders of the city, that he could marry this woman. Then he marries her in front of these 10 sages, these elders that gave their stamp of approval to the wedding. He marries her. And Boaz and Ruth live happily ever after, and they give birth to a son called Oved. Oved gives birth to a son called Yishai, or Jesse in English, and Yishai gives birth to 7 sons, and the youngest of his sons is David HaMelech, King David, the author of Tehillim, the one that will kill Goliath, etc. His his almost related, etc., etc. Okay. That is the story of Ruth. Yes.
Isn't there something
We're not done yet, yeah?
about David that there's a dispute of who his father might have not been?
Yes, I said that there's a lot of stories of the birth of David. I said we're not going to talk about the birth of David today. There's a story, a big story, big story. So come next week for the birth of David story. Next week with the birth of David story. Today we're not talking about him. We're talking about his great grandmother. Okay.
For the record, Obed and Ishai did not give birth to any of the kids.
On the other kids.
No, there's a woman who gives birth.
For the record, the father wanted to point out that Obed didn't do anything. All Obed did was give a contribution. He gave a contribution, but the actual birth happened by a woman that had to go through 9 months of pregnancy and go through labor and go through contractions and then feed the baby. And yes, that's true. Duly noted for the record. To who? Naomi? But she probably lives together with her daughter-in-law and now her cousin and also uncle, who's now also her son-in-law. It's great. Her uncle, who's also her cousin, is now her son-in-law. That's great. He's married. Well, she's not her. You're right, correct. Because Ruth is not her daughter. Ruth is her daughter-in-law. So she was like son-in-law-in-law, stepson-in-law. Stepson-in-law. Her uncle is her cousin, her stepson-in-law. Okay, there you go. Shouldn't, yeah, but the problem is, so the question, good question, why is Ruth the one getting married? The wife of Elimelech should be getting married, but she was too old to have children. As she already said, we read the text earlier, she said, I'm too old to have children. So what's the point of marrying a woman that's too old to have children, not going to do the mitzvah of Yibum? The whole point of the mitzvah of Yibum is to have children that will be born by this name. She was already an older woman. She had married sons that had married, and she wasn't having more children anymore. Okay. So now that you know the story, which is a fascinating story, now what's the me in the Bible? What do we take away from the story of Ruth? What makes Ruth so unbelievably special? I mean, yeah, obviously she converted, and yeah, she's a great grandmother of David. But guess what? Obed had a wife too, right? We don't know. I don't know her name. Maybe her name is mentioned. Maybe I don't know if her name is mentioned. Obed's wife is not. She's a grandmother of David. She's not talked about. What makes Ruth such an unbelievably important character in Judaism that we read about her on Shavuos night? That she's so. What's the story?
She had a chance to go back to where she came from and have a great life. Instead, she chose.
Exactly. Well, yeah, exactly what we're saying. Yes. So Kayla's saying correctly. Ruth didn't have to be a Jew. Ruth didn't have to follow her mother-in-law into the land of Israel. Ruth didn't have to accept possibly living a life of poverty amongst the Jewish people if Boaz would not have married. She didn't know. You have to realize, hindsight is 2020, right? So now you look back, yeah, of course, she went to Israel, she married a rich man, she became the great grandmother of David. Her life is pretty good. But if you were in her shoes at the time that Naomi is telling Ruth, go back to your wealthy family, stay with your nation, don't go with me to Israel, logic would say, what does this old penniless woman have to offer me? Nothing. She has nothing to offer me. Ruth, at that moment, made a choice that in logic didn't make any sense. There was no compelling reason or argument why she should leave behind the place where she came from, her family, her community, her culture, her upbringing, and follow Naomi, to the land of Israel. So, Ruth is still very, very special. I'll just say one thing. The Zohar says that the name Ruth is the same letters, Resh, Vav, Taf, is the same letters backwards as the word Tur. Tur is a dove. A dove is a Tur. Same letters, just backwards. I mean, just like the dove is the bird that's allowed on the altar, most birds are not offered on the altar. But a dove is offered on the altar, so to Ruth was allowed to join the Jewish people. Side note, beautiful statement in the Zohar. But anyway, besides that she was allowed to join the Jewish people, why does she join the Jewish people? Why does she join the Jewish people? And what is so special about her joining the Jewish people? So before I show you what's so special, I'll tell you what's so special. Do you remember in text number 1? Let's go share our screen again. What happens in text number 1? In the first text we were reading, if you go look at after Ruth tells them 3 times to go away, and they raise their voice and weep again. Verse 14. What does it say? Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth dafkaba. Ruth cleaved to her. What does it mean she cleaved to her? What's kissing? What's cleaving? So kiss, as I mentioned before, is a kiss. Cleaving is an act of bonding and connection. Says the Gemara, turn now to the Talmud in Sota, page 42. Turn to the next page that you have, the last text. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak is talking about how King David killed Goliath. This is the text from the Talmud. So the Gemara is talking about how King David killed Goliath, and how Goliath fell into the hands of David. Why did he fall? So says Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, said, Gavayu b'nei hanishuka. Let the children of the one who kissed, who's the one that kissed? Orpah, that kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. Let those children come and fall into the hand of the children of the one who was dvukah, who cleaved to her mother-in-law, referring to David, who descended from Ruth. So we see over here, the Talmud is saying very clearly, Rabbi Yitzchak is saying that the reason that makes Orpah was a very special lady. And I said that Orpah one that made herself very, very profane and made herself, why did she go off the deep end to the other extreme? Because she had this tremendous, tremendous guilt of not joining the Jewish people. She wanted to. The first time that Naomi said to Orpah and to Ruth, go back home, what does it say in verse number 8? If you look back at verse number 8, she said, go back home. And what do the women do? They say, no, we don't want to go back home. That's verse 9, verse 10. They say no, they refuse her. Only in verse number 11 does Naomi try again to get them to go back to their home. That finally, after this whole long argument, which is return my daughters, I've become too old, etc. Then, only then does she raise her voice and weep and say, okay, I'm going to go back home. But she cries. Talmud told us 4 times. She should have kept all the verses. You can see it. 4 times she cries to leave her mother-in-law. And they weren't fake crocodile tears. They weren't just like, well, whatever, like, you say, I'm so sad, it's great having you, I'm so sad you're leaving, whatever. Then they close, they're like, Baruch Hashem, they left, right? So like, wasn't fake crocodile tears that she truly loved her mother-in-law. And she truly wanted to join the Jewish people. What's my proof she truly wanted to join the Jewish people? Because the first time that her mother-in-law said to go, like I didn't keep the text in here. Okay, I want to make sure, but I should have. The first time the mother-in-law said to go, in verse number 8, she said, go back home, and they refuse her. They refuse her. Until Naomi has to beg them for verse 11, verse 12, verse 13, the whole argument why they should go back home and not stay with her. Until then, they're arguing, and only then they raise their voices, they weep, and Orpah kisses her mother, and she says goodbye. Understand? So Orpah was a very, very noble woman. And yet, Ruth is unique. Because Ruth cleaves to her mother-in-law. What does it mean she cleaves? So Rashi tells us that when her mother-in-law was telling her to go, and she said, I don't want to go, and Orpah left, so then Naomi says to Ruth, if you want to stay with me, I have to teach you the laws of conversion. I have to teach you the laws of a Jew. Don't think that being with me is going to be so enjoyable. Till now, you didn't see the full life of the Jewish community. Yes, you saw the beauty of my Jewish home with me and Elimelech, and you saw a beautiful Pesach Seder, and you saw a beautiful Shabbos dinner, and you saw beautiful values and morals and kindness and generosity and all the beautiful ideals and values and ethics that Naomi and Elimelech had in their home, the Machlon and Killian inherited from their mother, which didn't exist in the Moabite culture where they lived. So yes, you see that I'm a beautiful person with a beautiful culture, beautiful heritage, but that's not the full extent of the picture. There's a lot of limitations. There's a lot of rules, a lot of things that when you're going to join me, you're going to discover that are limiting to you, that you can't do, that are going to be difficult. In fact, as Rashi tells us, each line of what Ruth and Naomi says to each other is part of the rules of Judaism. So let's go through it. Let's look at verse 16 again. Ruth says to her mother-in-law, don't make me leave you. Wherever you go, I will go. What's the reference here to? Naomi says to her daughter, you know that on Shabbos is beautiful, no phone, no internet, no distraction, no TV dinner. We sit together as a family, we enjoy with the Shabbos candles. But guess what? You're not allowed to travel on Shabbos. On Shabbos, we have what's called Tchum Shabbos, the boundary of Shabbos. You can't go more than 2,000 feet or cubits, 3,000 feet away from where you are, from the border of the city. So if you want to join me, you want to stay as a Jew, you know there's a rule. On Shabbos, you can't go anywhere. And so what does Ruth respond? Wherever you go, I will go. And then she says there's another law. It's called Yichud. Yichud means that you cannot be in private, secluded, a man and a woman alone in the building, private where no one else can go. If a man and a woman are alone in a home, that's called yichud. It's a prohibition. So in your culture, in the Moabite land, men and women were very promiscuous. They're allowed to hang out together with each other in private. You're allowed to have the boundaries between man and woman are not so strict. And men and women can be alone with each other, have fun with each other and play with each other. That's allowed in your culture. But in Judaism, you're not allowed to be in the same room, same house as someone of the opposite sex. So what does she respond? Wherever you will lodge, I will lodge. The same rules of where you live and who you're allowed to be with, those rules of yichud, I accept them upon myself as well.
It doesn't fit with her going and sleeping in the guy's.
Yes, that's true, but that was in order to make a marriage. They're out in the field, that's true. No, this was an act in order to consummate a marriage. She was saying to him, I'm your relative, that you need to do the mitzvah of Yibum. It's a mitzvah. This is a rabbinic prohibition. She says to him, there's another law. We have 613 commandments. It's not just the tchum, the boundary of Shabbos, not just the boundary between men and women, the separation of men and women. We have so many laws. There's so many rules to being a Jew. The Moabites have 7 laws. We have 613. You sure you want that? So what does she respond? What does she say? Your people should be my people. And then what does the Naomi say to her? Do you know that the idolatry is forbidden to us? In Moab, they had a lot of idols. They had the church of this idol, the church of that god, and the synagogue. They had a lot of idols. The Jews have only one God, an invisible God, with no idol. You can't bring a tuna sandwich to him. He's a one God. And what does she say? Your God is my God. I accept it. And then she says to him, Naomi says to her daughter-in-law Ruth, there's 4 types of death penalties that the Beis Din will give to any Jew that violates these laws, who will violate Shabbos. There's a whole list of prohibitions that you get punished for. The death sentence. So he's saying, yeah, I'll do it. If you violate, you'll be liable to the death sentence by the Jewish court. And what does she say? Wherever you die, I will die. I accept the authorities in the Sanhedrin to put me to death if I violate any of these laws. And then Naomi says to her, yeah, but even when the people are killed by the Beis Din, it's a different place of burial for someone who's killed by stoning versus someone who's killed by hanging versus someone who's killed by strangulation. Each different method of the 4 kinds of death by the Beis Din were buried in different places in the cemetery. So it's not so simple. And what does Ruth say? Wherever you will be buried, I'll be buried. So may the Lord do to me, and so may he continue, if anything but death separate me and you. Understand? I'm not just coming after the beauty, after the greatness and the culture and the beautiful parts of Judaism. I understand that Judaism has all of these limitations, all of these rules, all of these boundaries of not traveling on Shabbos and not being secluded with some of the opposite gender, and of not doing the 613 commandments, and not worshiping idols, and being allowed to be put to death by the court and being buried in different places. I accept it all. Every rule, every limitation, every part of Judaism that many Jews can't stand about Judaism, I accept those two.
Sounds to me like the mother-in-law is just trying to get rid of her daughter-in-law.
She's doing a job of a real basis to make sure it's a real conversion, to make sure she's really sincere, that when she converts now, it's not because of marriage. She's doing it because she's dovka. And the Medrash says even more. The Medrash says, she says wherever...
Why did he, like, Naomi's son is Jewish, right?
Naomi's son, Elimelech. Why did he marry a Moabite girl? Excellent question. So why did Elimelech's sons marry Moabite girls? Either because when they move away from Israel, their sons became assimilated and they intermarried. Part of the... Elimelech, at the end of the day, left the Jewish community. He was one of the wealthy members of the community. He left it to protect his wealth. So what happens when you leave the Jewish community? The kids are hanging out with non-Jewish girls, and that's what happens. He married a Moabite girl. Some say that she converted, but still that's what happened. The point is, the Medrash even more, that she says, Naomi says to Ruth, we don't go to the same theaters as them. Wherever you go, I will go. The point is, this is the difference between Orpah, the mother of Goliath, and Ruth. Orpah loved Judaism. She loved it. She loved Judaism. But she was never willing to actually go all the way and to become dafkaba, to become cleaved and glued together as one. I love it, but only up to a certain point. It's beautiful. It's not talking to me. I'm not willing to put my life there. Ruth said, every law of the Torah, every detail, it's me. It applies to me. It's my life. This is a message for me to take from me, and therefore I'm taking it. That's to me in the Bible of Ruth.
Was still there when this was going on.
Well, it's after, this is already after, but all those laws were there. I mean, she leaves, they walk 40 steps. But the point is, maybe she said all this before, so she's answering all these things. Arpa loved it, but she up to a point. Up to a point. You want to hear a joke that I'm going to dissect? We have anyone in a rush to go home? I should keep on going. I'll tell you something beautiful. Came to my head now. I heard a beautiful idea. There's a classic joke. A beautiful joke, classic joke. You know when the Yiddish joke really goes far, when there's American versions of the same joke. I heard the joke with Bush and with the Clinton, whatever. But originally it's a joke of Chelm. You all know what Chelm is? Chelm, the city of Chelm. The city of Chelm was officially a city of very smart people in Poland, but as a stereotype, they were like considered the biggest fools of Poland, the fools, the wise men of Chelm, quote unquote, were the fools of Chelm. So one day the Gabbai, you know the Gabbai is the attendant of Chelm, travels to Warsaw, to the big city of Warsaw. And there he comes to shul, he meets the Gabbai of Warsaw. So the attendant, the shul caretaker, let's say the president of the synagogue, make it more American, more relevant. So the president of the shul of Chelm comes and he meets the president of the shul of Warsaw, the big shul of Warsaw. So the president of the shul of Warsaw says to the president of the shul of Chelm, I hear in Chelm, they're very smart people. You're all such geniuses, right? So tell me, I'll ask you a riddle. Let's see how smart you are. What's the riddle? He says to the president of the shul of Chelm, I am my father's son, but I'm not my brother. Who am I? Who am I? I'm my father's son, but I'm not my brother. Know what it is? The president is confused. The president, my father's son, that's my brother, not my brother. Not my brother, but my father's son, that's not my brother. Can't figure it out. Finally gives up. He says, I give up. So the president of the shul in Warsaw says, it's me. I'm my father's son, but I'm not my brother. Brilliant. Brilliant. The president from the shul of Chelm loves it. He comes back to Chelm. He gathers all the wise men of Chelm and says, rabbis, I have a riddle for you. What's the riddle? Tell me, O wise men, who am I? I am my father's son, but I'm not my brother. Who am I? And they're thinking, my father's son, but not my brother, but it's my father's son. That's not my brother. They can't figure it out. Father said, tell us. With the big excitement, the big smile on his face, the guy by the president of the Shul of Chelm says, the answer is the president of the Shul of Warsaw. So it's funny. It's funny. Now I'm going to dissect the joke. So I heard Rabbi Tav, Shei Tav, a big fan, he says that when you dissect a joke, it's like dissecting a frog. Why like dissecting a frog? When you dissect a frog, you understand the frog much better. But the frog is dead. You understand? So when you dissect the joke is dead, but you understand the joke much better. Why is the joke funny? Why is it funny that this president from Chelm says that the man who's my father's son, but not my brother, is him? What should he have said? Me. What was the problem? He was such a fool that he didn't realize that the joke was meant to apply to him. He thought that the punchline is literally the guy from Warsaw. He didn't have the brains to recognize that the punchline is about any person that says the joke can say the joke about themselves. Anyone can say the joke about them because the joke applies to any single person. But he convinced him that he was so simplistic, so literal. This is the story of the guy in Warsaw. So I'm telling you, rabbis and Chaim, I'm repeating the joke, not about me, but about somebody else. This is the way many of us sometimes approach Judaism. We approach Judaism, it's not about me. It's true, it's a story of Ruth, story of Judaism, but that I should make these laws, I should make these values, Torah talks about charity, about love, about prayer, about God, that it's me in my life. Story of him. It's the rabbi that says the story. It's Ruth. It's Naomi. It's Boaz. It's someone else, and we forget to realize that actually the punchline's on us. The whole story is for us. So Naomi taught both of her daughter-in-laws all of the beauty of Judaism, and one of her daughter-in-laws, Orpah, said, "Very beautiful," but at the end of the day, it's her story. It's Naomi's story. And Ruth understood that this joke is a joke. The story, the message, the life of a Jew, it's not just someone else's story. The life of a Jew, every detail in Torah, every aspect of Torah, every part of Torah, it's for me to become connected to it, to cleave to it. Not just, it's a nice idea. Keep Shabbos is a nice idea. To keep kosher, the Torah says it, but it's not for my life. The Torah says it. Okay, the Torah says it. But my life is different than what the Torah says. Ruth is so amazing. She's such a hero in Judaism because Ruth was able to understand that everything the Torah says, it's my life. This is my story. This is about me. And that's why the words of her mother-in-law didn't just inspire her that she cried and inspire her that she kissed. I love you. You get inspired and you give a hug and a kiss and you give tears. It's nice. It's good. But it's not life-changing. Ruth connected. Ruth was connected. She was cleaved with all of her heart and soul to recognize that these words of Torah, these are me. This is my. And that's the lesson we need to take from the story of Ruth. To come to Shavuos, to come to the time of receiving the Torah, to recognize that the Torah is my Torah. It's every detail of it. It's my details. It's my Torah. These are my laws. These are my every nuance. It's my story. That's the story, my friends. Okay. Good night, everyone that's watching. Thank you.